Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Michelle here from happyhealthyher.com. And this week's compassionate chat is a little bit different from anything we've done before. So in the past, we've been talking about narcissism. We've been talking how to spot them, some of the red flags, a lot of the signs, why it's so difficult, and even sort of the elements of being a narcissist magnet. This chat is about my own personal story with leaving my narcissistic marriage and all of the abundant spiritual support, synchronicity, signs, and people who were brought into my life that helped me and guided me and supported me. This is a topic of hope, and I really hope that this will help you to feel better if you are either in a narcissistic relationship or some form of experiencing some kind of trauma or any other difficulties. I really hope that you will see some guidance with what I'm about to share, because signs and symbols and our spiritual connections are always there to help and guide us. So to start, I've mentioned this before, but I left a narcissistic marriage. It's been about 8 years now since I was in that relationship, and I didn't realize I was married to a covert narcissist. We fought all the time, but I just did not see the signs because at the time I didn't know what a covert narcissist was. So as an aside, a covert narcissist tends to be a very nice narcissist. They look like a really nice, caring person, but they actually do a lot of the more underhanded things that a narcissist does. And in essence can be a lot more challenging to spot and even more difficult to live with than someone who is a very overt narcissist who is really clear that they have those traits. So we hit a point in our relationship where I was just like at my wit's end, and I went to him right around New Year's, actually. I think it might have been New Year's Eve. And I said to him, can we just do some more work? I bought this book and I want to work on our relationship. And he said to me, I'm not working on this relationship. This is ridiculous. All the problems in our relationship are because of you. And for the very first time, I thought, that is ridiculous. And I started to laugh. I thought, it's impossible for one person to carry an entire relationship. There's no way that's true. And I said, well, if you don't want to work on us, then we have no other option. I guess we'll have to be done. And he says, I guess we will. And it was just like the weirdest, like matter of fact, just everything ended. And at that exact moment, a hawk flew in front of our kitchen window where we were talking. Like so close that it was like hitting the window. And I was stunned and I said to him, what was that? And he turned to me and he said, it was a hawk. So I guess we are done. Because he knew that I was deeply spiritual and that hawk was my sign. Hawk was my sign of confirmation, my sign of validation. Hawk represents communication. He did not believe in my signs, but he knew what they meant. And he knew it's official. Spirit had even spoken. So after that happened though, as neutral as it seemed to be, I was devastated. And I immediately set out to start looking for a full-time job, and because I had been consulting and I knew I needed to get benefits, or at least I thought I needed to get benefits. I thought I needed a new place to live because he had actually told me if this is the case, you have to get out of my house, which honestly was not. It was our house, but whatever. I wanted to leave. So I set out to find a job, and I opened it up to the entire state, and fairly quickly in my search, I came across this job that was absolutely perfect for me. It was the right hours. It was in a community where I had actually thought, hey, I think I would like to live there. It was a lot more peaceful than where I was living. And so I was so excited. I remember I literally fell to my knees and started to cry because I was like, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for sending me this thing. Thank you for guiding me, telling me where to go next. So fairly quickly, the organization gets back to me. It was a nonprofit, and I go in for an interview. In my first interview, I met with someone who was was like, I wouldn't have been necessarily a direct report to this person. And everything went well, and they described everything, and I was sort of like wowed. And there were all sorts of symbols in the building. There was this gorgeous butterfly statue or sculpture in the entryway, and I was like immediately moved because I love butterflies. I have a butterfly pendant on today, and it just was so symbolic to me. I was like, oh my gosh, it's almost like the universe is telling me, this is your place. Another side note of this is really kind of interesting. They also had a statue of a Greek key, which is a symbol that at the time I had never really even paid much attention to and didn't even know what it represented. But I loved it. And shortly after that interview, I found these Greek key shower rings at Target on clearance and was like, these are cool, I'm going to buy them. Now, I share this because 3 years later, the love of my life turned out to be Greek. And when I met him, I remember thinking, wow, I think I was getting symbolism around him as soon as that period, even though, of course, at that period, I wasn't even considering dating. I was just trying to get through my divorce and get a job. So I go for a follow-up interview with the person who is actually going to be my manager. And I was being love bombed. And I knew on some level that I was being love bombed. This person was just telling me everything I needed to hear. They were saying, you are the best writer. We read your materials. We are so excited. You do such a beautiful job. And I really was doubting my writing skills after years of being in consulting and being criticized a lot. So I was like, oh my gosh, here's this person saying, we want to hire you. You're so exciting. We're so thrilled with your skills. But there were definitely red flags in the interview that I promptly dismissed. And I also vulnerably revealed to this person that I was about to go through a divorce, which I should never have done. You never want to do that in an interview. You never want to share vulnerable information, because what ultimately happened was she knew I wanted the job. She knew I needed the job. And they gave me a very lowball offer, which I promptly accepted without even questioning, without even negotiating, without even thinking clearly, because what I did not know at the time was that rent in that community where I would be working was way too high for that salary. Like, I was not going to be able to pay my rent on that salary. But I just was so head over heels with the idea of taking this job, and it felt so strongly that I was supposed to take the job, which I ultimately know now, or at least believe to be true. I do think I was supposed to take that job for a variety of reasons. And so even though on the very first day I started the job, it was incredibly clear that this person that I was going to be working with was very narcissistic. Their behavior was disrespectful. They actually didn't even know who I was when I showed up for work. It was really interesting. The whole dynamic left me dazed and confused. And so I'm sitting at my desk thinking, should I run out of this building, like screaming? Like, am I supposed to be here? And I ultimately talked myself off the ledge and said, yes, you know, spirit guides you, and you are clearly here for a reason. One foot in front of the other. You can do it. And so I did. I committed to taking the job, and I ended up finding a rental place that was unfortunately in my budget, but an hour commute from the building. But it was in a community that was wonderful, and the townhouse and the whole neighborhood I was in was just really perfect. And so in a lot of ways things aligned, even though it was incredibly difficult. So this was something that had me really stumped, actually. I was in this mindset of, okay, I'm leaving this relationship where I know there's narcissism present, not realizing it was actually present with my husband, but just knowing that it was present around me. Why would spirit dump me into another environment where there's more narcissism? And you've probably heard this. It's painful. to hear this, but it is the truth that we are placed places to get our lessons, to learn our lessons, and we don't stop having those lessons until we really learn what we're meant to learn. So turned out, I didn't really know that much about narcissism. I didn't really understand, of course, covert narcissism. I didn't have any idea of how emotionally and physically abused, not physically in the actual sense, but like physically in my body being run down, how drained I was from all of it. And I was continuing to attract it into my world. I still had lessons to learn. And the beautiful thing, though, is that there were amazing people in that facility. And the work I got to do was amazing and heartfelt and spiritual. And there were a lot of reasons beyond having this test of narcissism present that I was meant to learn. In particular, there were quite a few women working in the facility who were divorced. And several of them had even confided in me, told me that they had divorced from someone who was narcissistic or a really difficult person. And so they all warned me. They were giving me heads up. Be careful. If you divorce someone like this, they are going to try to hurt you. They are going to try to take from you. They are not going to be fair. And I heard all of that. I took it with a grain of salt. It was kind of like, yeah, that's not going to happen to me. Well, that is what happened to me. My divorce settlement didn't end up being especially fair. But ultimately, it was fairly quick in relation to what other people have endured. I was not about to fight, and I just kind of settled in, and I got enough. And my life now is fantastic. And so I know that everything played out the way it was supposed to, even though it didn't look at the time like it was fair per se. Now, I also want to stress in all of what I'm sharing, I'm obviously talking about other people, and I am not doing that to vilify anybody. I know that this is my perception of the story, and this is my path, and so I know that other people probably have a different version of this and see it very differently, and I respect that. This is meant to just share my understanding and sort of my experience in hopes that it will help other people. So one of the cool things, or several of the cool things during my divorce, is I took a very day by day approach. I literally was just like, every day, just get through your day. I wasn't planning. I wasn't thinking long term for goals. I was just like head down, survivor mode. Literally. Go in, do what you need to do, go home, sleep. Repeat every single day. But I was also really careful to bring in spiritual practices. And so I do want to share, every day I read from Melody Beattie's The Language of Letting Go. This is a daily, it has day by day, it'll, the day of the year, and then a little tip. Melody Beattie is like the originator of the term codependency, or at least it is perceived that she had come up with this. And what she shared was so helpful in this guide, and it helped me to get through. In addition, I picked medicine cards, a medicine card every single day. Medicine cards are animal spirits, and they give a message according to what the animal represents. And so over time, I became very skilled in understanding what each of the different animals represented, so that when they would cross my path, I would get guidance. I highly suggest this as an oracle, especially if you are first beginning trying to get some spiritual guidance, because it's so helpful, because it gives you a connection to the spirit world, the natural world, through animals. At the same time I was going through my divorce, I found this ring. It actually says hope. I don't know if you can see, it's not going to be able to probably focus well. It says hope, and there's a little flower bud. Now, I wore this almost every day going into work because it gave me hope. It gave me something to focus on. And you should know too, my mom's name is Hope. My dad's name was Bud. Hope with a bud. When my dad was declining from Alzheimer's disease, he passed in 2014. I took him out to dinner one time. My parents were visiting, and I told them that I had this vision for myself at some point of tattooing Mom's name, Hope, with a rosebud intertwined around it to represent the both of them. And my dad looked at me, and I thought he was going to say, no daughter of mine is going to tattoo her body, or something like that. He didn't. He looked at me with tears in his eyes, and he was just like, that is the most beautiful and brilliant thing I have ever heard. And I was like so stunned by it. But of course, I have not yet decided to have a tattoo because I'm just a little worried actually of what's going to do to my body. So instead, Spirit brought me this beautiful ring, and I was wearing that ring every day as I was going to work, working through the divorce. I also found this beautiful pendant that I also got for my best friend and her child. And it says one of my favorite mantras, she believed she could, so she did. And so the point of what I'm sharing here is that when you're going through rough periods, it's really helpful to surround yourself by positive affirmations, especially things that you can see on a daily basis. Another thing that is really beautiful is music. I'm deeply connected to music, and music is very spiritual. So during that period of my divorce, Katy Perry released the song Rise. And I just listened to it earlier. And she says, I won't just survive. No, you will see me thrive. And the first day I was listening to that, I remember I was driving through the back roads in my town, heading out to get groceries or something. And I had to pull over because I was crying, because it felt like she had written that song for me. And I had created a playlist with that on it and many other songs. It's actually now called my You Are a Warrior playlist. It's the playlist I listen to on a loop during my divorce. I share that playlist in my book, Online Dating for Sensitive Women, because it really was so powerful for me. And I'm going to link to that below if that's something you're interested in checking it out. Music is powerful. The music that shows up around you when you're going through difficult times is often a spiritual nudge. It's often a push and a support. So pay attention to that and use it. Surround yourself by music if that is something that is meaningful to you. So I'm going into work every day. Got this hour commute. I'm really stressed. I'm very aware that there is like some narcissistic energy present where I'm working. I'm having a hard time. The divorce is finally finalized, and it felt like I had been running a marathon. And so, like a lot of people, when they're running, you're operating on adrenaline. And once the divorce was final, it was like I had hit a wall. And I was officially burned out. I was sick. I was exhausted. I didn't feel well. You know, I just was like, I don't think I can do this. And so, amazingly, one of my colleagues calls me one day at my desk, and we had digital phones, and I answer the phone, and as she's speaking to me, she's saying to me, Michelle, the women who do energy healing are here. You need to come downstairs right now. There's a spot available, and it's got your name on it. And normally I would say, no, give it to someone else. But it was 11:11 on the clock, which is a spiritual sign that you're being supported, you're being guided. And I said to her, I will be right down. So I run down, and these women were so lovely. They were volunteers. They would do energy healing for people. And they were a team. One would do the energy healing and one was doing like a mediumship read. I've never had anything like it since. It's really fantastic. And so they start working on me, and I knew I was so chaotic. I was so stressed because I had a lot of deadlines that day, and I was like, my job was always deadlines every single day. And I was just like, oh my gosh, couldn't really relax. And then finally, the energy healing does its thing, and I'm like totally mush. And they work on me for a little while, and then they bring me back out, and they will tell you what they get for guidance. And so I had been feeling like so dark and so depleted. And one of the women said to me, Michelle, you really were chaotic. Your energy was all over the place. But once we focused you, once we tapped into you, they said, you had the brightest light we have ever seen here. We work on a lot of people here. Your light shot out. It filled up the whole room. She's like, it's in the entire place. She's like, honestly, you are so powerful and you don't even know it. And I could cry now. I cried then because I felt so dark. I felt like I had been so taken from. I felt like I was so empty. And here were these people telling me, no, you still have this spark inside of you that's always there. You just need to calm and get into the zone and it will light up. And the woman who did the mediumship said she could see a bunch of different animals around me that were supporting me. And one of them, she said specifically, and I just looked at these notes, by the way, that's one of my tips is you always want to take notes when things are happening around you. You want to journal. You want to know this stuff. Because what she said with one of the animals was kangaroo, was that it represented a 9-month cycle, and that I put in quotes, it's time to get out of here. Now, I had been in that job for around 9 months, and I knew, I was like, wow, she's giving me the guidance and the green light that I need to go. So I approached my managers and thinking, like, this is going to be fine. I'm just going to tell them, look, I'm burnt out. I'm really sick. They know what I've been through. They'll likely be compassionate, right? And no, I was wrong. They reacted so harshly. They were like angry. How dare I? How dare I, like, think that I should have a reduced schedule? No, we hired you to do this, this, and this, and you know what you were up against, and if you don't like it, then you have to leave. And I was like, okay, well, then I think I have to leave. And I said, but I don't want to drop my whole project. I'd been working on a project building up their exposure and a lot of different things. And I was like, I'm not the kind of person who's just going to quit and leave you hanging. So I said, well, why don't you replace me? And so they set out to replace me. And one of the other secondary managers that I reported to pulled me into his office one day, and he shows me this stack of resumes like this high. And he's like, these are all the people who want your job, and they all want double what you're making. And they can't write at all like you, anywhere near have your skill set. And I was like, wow, that is both the nicest compliment and like almost like the biggest dig I'd ever had, because basically he's telling me I'm doing a job. I've been doing a job at a value and a level double of what I'd been making. But also, obviously, the key takeaway I was meant to hear, I do believe, was that I have great skills, because I wasn't feeling that way. I was often not feeling that way in my job. And so what a gift to have someone really say this to you. But regardless, I knew I had to leave because it was too draining. And I said, okay, if you can't replace me, we got to figure out something else. Maybe I can do some work from home. Maybe I can be part-time. And they ultimately decided I needed to quit, lose all my vacation pay, lose all my benefits, and then work part-time. And I weirdly agreed to that. What was I going to say? So I start that routine and I start looking for a job quite actively. And I get a job interview with this wonderful facility, and I'm driving to the interview, and I met with this person, and on the front door of the building was the word simplify. And it was really wild because this was the beginning of a new year. And you know how you pick a word for the year? Well, my word for the year was simplify. I even have a blog about it. I'm going to link to that below. But I walk in with this like feeling of, wow, I'm supposed to be at this interview. I'm supposed to meet this person. And the man that I was meeting with was so lovely and kind. And we had a great chat about spirituality. And I was just like, oh my gosh, he speaks my language. And we did a tour around the facility. And I was asking him like deep questions like, well, what's the hard thing about the job? And he revealed that for him, it was long hours, and he missed his wife and his kids because he loved his wife so much. And I was just like so moved by that, because at that point, I was starting to feel like I'm not sure true love exists. You know, you leave a divorce, you feel really beat up. You start to think good men maybe don't exist. Well, here's the universe showing me this sweet, spiritual, kind, amazing man, and like how much he loves his family. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I leave that interview, and I'm just feeling like I'm walking on a cloud. And they call me right away for a second interview. And on the way to the second interview, I'm driving down one of the back roads before getting to the facility, and an eagle flies in front of my car. Now, at this time, eagle sightings in the state of Connecticut, where I live, were not common. And eagle for me was my sign of freedom. And I saw that, and I immediately said, you're free. You're free to leave. You're free to go. Even if this interview doesn't work out, you're free to go. And so I drive to the interview kind of like already feeling like I had the interview. I felt like I already had won. And the interview was lovely. I met more people, and they were really nice. But the challenge of the job was it was part-time. It was no benefits. It wasn't great pay. And I was really conflicted by that. Still, I left the interview, and I went to a liquor store that was close by. And I walked in looking for a celebratory drink. And I found this bottle of champagne, which, if you notice, is my favorite color, turquoise, and my name on it. This is actually a winery, Michelle. And the champagne was delicious, by the way. But what I was doing was I was celebrating preemptively, because that's what you do when you want to manifest good into your life. You celebrate. This is actually the first step in my book and course, Free from Narcissists. Step number 1 is celebrate. Because when you see that you've been in a difficult situation and you get yourself out, that is worthy of celebration. So I, in my heart, knew the job probably isn't for me, but it had bolstered me. It had made me feel really good about my skills and around the goodness of people, that there are opportunities out there. And I think it was within a couple days, if not that day, that I was contemplating that. I talked to my manager about something, and the main manager, who had been so difficult to me and so cruel to me, had just said something really rude to me in a meeting. And the manager was calling me to, I don't know if he was trying to placate me because he realized she'd been so rude, or why he was calling me. But in the midst of calling me, I just blurted out, I quit. And he was like, what? I was like, I can't work here anymore. I just can't. And you know why. And I just, I'm sorry. That's it. I'll get you my laptop. I'll get you all my stuff, but I'm done. He was like, whoa, okay. And like, it was that fast. It was that seamless. Done. And probably within a couple days, I'm searching again for jobs, and I find this absolutely made for me job. It was again like a reduced schedule because I deal with fatigue, and so I usually can't work 40 hours, but with benefits at a very reputable organization. And they were looking for my exact skill set, which is so rare. I have a background as a dietitian and I often work in communications, and they don't always overlap. Well, this particular job overlapped those two things and more. It had all the skills I have. I was like, I am a shoo-in for this job. The only challenge was it was not quite at the right pay grade. But I was like, that's fine. I'm so burnt out. I want to take an entry-level job. I want to take a job that's not high responsibility. I'm on it. So I apply and I get some feedback from the hiring manager that was like, yeah, I'm so excited. And then I don't hear anything for a while. But I see an ant on the stairs in my townhouse, nowhere near a window or a door. It's just this big ant. And what I knew from my medicine cards is that ants represent patience. So I knew, I'm like, you got to just be patient. So the other job, I had told them, I just don't think it's going to work out. And I just decided to commit to waiting and seeing if this dream job, or at least what looked like a dream job, was going to show up. So I finally get an interview. I meet the person who's going to be my manager. We hit it off just perfectly. It was like, I felt like the stars were aligning. I was walking on a cloud. But it was a government job. And so I think it actually took like a month or two before I finally got the offer. And so for that time period, I was just so stressed and nervous and like worrying, but I kept getting sort of spiritual signs in other ways that I was being protected and I needed to just be patient. So I waited it out. And I start the job and I was so nervous. I don't think I've ever been so nervous for a job, which was really weird. I was like, I don't know why I'm so nervous, but I was. And I think ultimately I probably knew what I was walking into. Now, government jobs are sort of notorious for bureaucracy and hierarchy and a lot of things. I've talked about this in a previous video, but government agencies actually have a built-in level of narcissism that's just part of the culture. I didn't know that at the time, but man, did I learn that the hard way. So I start the job and I come to realize pretty quickly that it wasn't just me working on the communications project that I thought it was. There were actually a bunch of other people, and I was going to be sort of managing them, which was shocking because I didn't know that. I didn't realize that, and I definitely did not want to be a manager. And to make matters worse, on like my second or third day in the office, this young woman comes up to me, who I would later learn actually was someone who worked for me, and very rudely said to me, "What qualifies you to have this job?" And I was like, whoa. I mean, major mean girl energy. And I just very politely explained my 20 years of communication experience, my experience as a dietitian, all the websites I run, all the things I do. And she just, with her mouth gaping open was like, "Oh, okay." And she went away. But come to find out, she had wanted my job, even though she had no credentials at all whatsoever. And so what I now understand she was representing to me, and there were other people in the department younger than myself, who were very overconfident with their skills, who modeled just a false bravado, that what I think I was meant to learn by that was to value myself and realize my worth and show up knowing what I brought to the table. Because when I first started the job, I was very passive. I was very like, okay, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to make waves. I don't want to show everybody what I can do. I'm just going to observe for a time. And I did. And that particular mean girl, who had implied that she knew much more than me, actually at one point ended up in my office in tears because she didn't know what she was doing. And so it really modeled to me, again, like I said, I have worth and I need to own my worth. That there are people walking around who are exclaiming that they have value, that they know what they're doing, and they actually don't. So when you have something to share of value, you sure as heck better show up and own it and do it. But even when this person was sort of out of the picture and I'd kind of figured this, the person actually left of their own accord. What I started to realize again about working in a government job is there were all these arbitrary rules. We were always as a team having to justify our existence. I know that my small team, we were working our butts off and we were doing really good work and we were paid probably lower than other departments. But we were always having to justify ourselves. A huge portion of our time was spent justifying the grant funding we actually had to pay for our salaries. And to me, I was just like, this is maddening. I want to be doing good work and putting good work out into the world, not spending a bunch of time doing paperwork and trying to prove that what I'm doing as a service is actually helpful. And then on top of that, I realized, I was being underpaid for what I was doing. And I talked to my manager, and for the first time in my life, she was like, you are absolutely correct. Let's get you a raise. But she said to me, there's two ways we can go about it. We can go the above the board way where we actually fill out a bunch of paperwork, send it to HR, and have it approved. Or I can do another way where I know is going to work. We repost your job, you reapply, it's a similar job, it's reclassified, and you immediately get the money. Well, me, Miss Goody Two-Shoes, is like, well, I want to do the way that's the right way to do. So we go through the rigmarole, we fill out all the paperwork, and it gets denied. I was stunned. I was like, how can this even happen? Both of my managers have signed off on it. HR doesn't even know me. HR is like a building elsewhere that never met me. Like, how do they get to decide what to do with our funding? Well, this is what that happens with the government. I recently had a friend share the exact same scenario in a different, totally different person, totally different, department, obviously, same scenario. This person was not allowed to hire someone that they wanted to hire, even though the person was super qualified and doing amazing work. They weren't allowed. So this is the thing about being in a government system. You are subject to these terrible arbitrary rules, and someone like myself who's a rule follower is the one who ends up getting hurt, because you have to almost learn how to circumvent the rules to survive. But I was not willing to circumvent the rules, and that was a hard lesson, that doing that meant I was shooting myself in the foot. This is often the case, by the way, with narcissistic people, is they won't follow the rules. So those of us who do follow the rules end up getting hurt in the process. So I was really struggling with sort of this conundrum of, what am I doing here? Why am I in this role? Why would Spirit put me here in yet another test? But also I had this sense of, there was someone in the department, there was something that had happened that was a real crisis situation that I needed to step up and help do that person's job. And I was uniquely qualified to do it, but also was cool with doing it because I really wanted to help this person. And after that situation was resolved, in my head I was like, that's why you're here, but maybe you should go. And yet I was getting a little too comfortable with having government benefits, and I didn't really want to go. So I was really kind of struggling. And on the day-to-day, by the way, I was getting beautiful messages all the time. I had just bought a house, my little dream house that I'm sitting in today. And I had been on the beach and found this awesome rock in my favorite color that says believe. And, I was starting to date and meeting different people. So I was filled with so much hope and optimism. And I was kind of just like, well, the job is good enough. Even though it's stressful, even though there's some things that are really irking me, it's good enough. And being the rule follower I suddenly realized, I had been using my own personal phone for work purposes to do some of my work roles. And we didn't have a great budget. And suddenly we had money come up. So I went to my manager and said, I think it's time we get a cell phone for the department. And she totally agreed. She was really agreeable to a lot of things. And I was kind of resistant. I was like, oh no, it's going to mean a lot of paperwork, because that's always what happens with government, is lots of paperwork. But I go into the requisition form and I'm shocked to find it literally had like 3 fields. I think it had your name, your department, like what was the purpose. And I submitted it, and within a day or two, I think this nice man responds to me and say, we got your paperwork and we're processing it. And I think he even asked me what color you wanted. And I was like, wow, like this is wild. And so we're back and forth, and he tells me probably within a week or two that the phone had come in. And I was like, wow, this is great. Because a lot of times when I dealt with other departments, there was pushback, people were not very nice, and it was really weird. It was very strange. Here's this really nice man. He emails me, said, come on over to the building where he works, and you can pick up the phone, and I'll go over like the basics of what you need to know. And I respond, awesome, thank you so much. When would you like me to come? And he said, anytime you want. And I was like, what? Like, nobody did that. Everybody would always give you like a really small window on their time frame, and here's this guy being totally collaborative in it. So I offered up sometimes, what's best for you? And he came back with, again, he was kind of like, whatever's best for you. And I said, okay, I'm going to come at certain times. So it was at the end of my day, and I go over and park my car in, and it was a building that I had been to for my orientation. And it was really interesting because I had that feeling of flashback of my orientation when I was so nervous about this job. And I walk in and I'm still feeling this weird energy of like nerves. And I go to try to use my pass to let me down the stairs where he had told me I needed to go to meet him, and it wouldn't work. And so I flag someone and tell them why I'm there, and I have my paperwork, and they walk me down. Now, the building had these beautiful glass windows. It was really, where I had been in the conference room had been lovely and filled with sunshine. And where we were going was like down into the pit of hell. It was like a cubicle farm with no windows. And I get like, I'm walking through this maze of desks, and I'm kind of having this awareness of no wonder why some of the people I talk to are cranky. Because I worked in a small office, and we did have an area where there were windows. It was a much better setup. I get brought to this man's desk, and he is just beaming, and he's really sweet energy. And I'm, as an empath, I can feel his energy, and I'm like, feel so like, there's like this welcoming warmth. And he has dreads, and he appears to be from Jamaica, which I'm assuming, but he then proceeds to tell me that later. And I sit down, and he tells me, you're gonna need a phone case. And I was like, oh no, I didn't think of that. I'm afraid I'm gonna drop it in the meantime. I'm like, okay, well, what do you suggest? And he shows me his phone, and he's got a turquoise phone. Well, turquoise is my favorite color, as I've mentioned several times on previous chats. And I said, oh my God, I love turquoise. I love that. And he looks at me, and he smiles. And as a side note, turquoise is a very spiritual color. I became absolutely obsessed with turquoise in 2014, around the time my dad was about to pass, and also when I was doing a lot of deep spiritual work. So I have this major affinity, and I've done research on it and found that turquoise is the combination of green with blue. Now, green is our heart chakra, where we have love and compassion, and blue is our throat chakra, where is our communication. So it's so fascinating to me that blue and green and turquoise is such a way of how I show up in the world. I give compassionate chats. Turquoise really is about like expressing yourself in a compassionate way. And so here I'm meeting this man who presumably has that same energy, that same feeling. And he said, let me show you something. And he brings up his computer and he starts showing me pictures of himself in a blue full suit, a turquoise tuxedo. And he's showing me pictures of his kids and of Jamaica. And, you know, he did share, you know, he was from Jamaica. He'd been in the country for a while, and then his kids were his world. And it was so beautiful. And I'm sitting there having this spiritual connection with this man. And he stops and he stares at me for a second and he said, "You're not like the others." And I laughed and I said, "No, and you're not either." And it was just like this moment of validation of like two people who see this system and don't really understand it. And it told me you can be in a narcissistic system and not conform to the system. You can be yourself and shine your light. And here was this person doing it. And I was trying to do it too. And, you know, we just had this moment. He started telling me as well about how stressful his job was and how most of the people he talked to yelled at him, were berating, were cruel, and that many of the people he dealt with were trying to get free devices. So he dealt with the cell phones, the iPads, that kind of stuff. And we're talking about high level people. We're talking about people who made big salaries that were trying to get free devices off this government funding. It was just like, I was like, what? Like, I was appalled because I had been so nervous about asking for it, even though it was very much something I needed for my work. So it was just so much validation in that conversation. And I walked out, and as I'm walking to my car, there's hawks swirling in the sky. And I had this sense, I wasn't wrong. My perception of where I was that I was a square peg in a round hole. I was right job, wrong place. I was loving people. There were some loving people I worked with in a really toxic situation. And it wasn't feeling good anymore. And I knew that. I sort of had overstayed my welcome. But I wasn't quite ready to go. And the interesting thing about having experienced sitting in his cubicle in the dark with no windows was that I realized I had been in an office. My office was interior. It was an interior office. So even though, like I said, our small office had windows, I didn't see sunlight. I would come in around 9:30, 10 and leave around 5:36. I often missed the sunsets. I often missed much sunlight at all. My head was down. I was working on the computer all day long. And I shared an office with another colleague. And I just said to her, within a couple days, actually, I said, "I don't want you to be offended, but I need to move out by the window." We had a cubicle farm in our department, but we had lost a ton of staff. So there were, like, all the desks were open, including one of the desks right in front of the window. So I asked my manager, I said, "I really need sunlight." And she said, "Sure." And I moved everything. And that sunlight sustained me for another probably, I want to say 6 months. And then the pandemic hit and my job shifted again and things got even more challenging, and we were being told our funding was being cut and that we were, being merged with another department, and everything just sort of started to feel like it was caving in. And my spiritual guidance was telling me over and over, I kept coming across this message leap and the net will appear. And so finally, I just said, I got to go. And I gave them my notice, a 1 month notice, and packed up all my things, created a process sheet of how to do my job, trained a junior employee, like eased out of the role as much as I possibly could. And it was really hard to do, actually. It was very, very hard to leave that work that I felt was very meaningful to me. But as I've shared in You Can Always Leave, I'm going to put a link to that below, I knew I needed to, because the leaving opened up a space for my own healing, for my own creativity, and even a greater financial awareness that I didn't have. Once I left that job, I reframed everything I did. I simplified my life. I got my finances really down to the penny. And so I now live this much more simple life. And even though I have very, very limited income, all my needs are met. And my finances have actually grown. And so it's this beautiful spiritual protection again, and awareness that we are guided and protected. So that was long. If you stuck with me, thank you very much. I'm going to go through the 6 tips that maybe you're waiting for on how to access your spiritual guidance and the protection that comes through it. Now, I've already kind of mentioned this, but you have to pay attention. Spirit's going to speak to you in a variety of ways, and you have to learn how to see it. So I've already mentioned, I pick oracle cards and I see numbers on the phone or on my dashboard app in my car. I will get songs. I will see even memes on Facebook sometimes show up that I know are meant for me. You got to be paying attention and also making note of it. So journal about your awareness, or use your memo on your phone. Talk through what you're getting for signs so you can process them and figure out what they might mean for you. The second step is to simplify your life. So many of us are chaotic. When I was going through my divorce, I was pretty chaotic. So even though I was seeing the signs, I wasn't fully letting them in. I wasn't fully feeling them. I really didn't know I was free the entire time I was in the job I was in, thinking I couldn't leave. I was always free to leave. Like, you have to be able to simplify and get down to the bare bones of life so that you're able to make the choices that feel best to you. The third thing is actually trusting your knowing and realizing that you are in a collaboration with Spirit. It's not just that Spirit is handing down all these synchronicities and signs and you need to follow what they're saying. No, they're working with you. They're trying to let you know you're supported, but you ultimately have free will. You ultimately get to choose. That is why Spirit was letting me sometimes stay in these narcissistic places, because I wasn't seeing them. I wasn't choosing myself. I wasn't recognizing my worth. I wasn't moving forward. They're not going to kick you out. They're not going to make you do anything. You have to make these moves and recognize that many times what you're being called to do really actually is in your best interest. You also need to understand, especially if you are an empath or what you might call a light worker. I know that sounds really woo-woo, but many times we are placed in situations that are not about us. It's not always about me. Like, when I look at a lot of the jobs I've had, I can see that I was not there for me. I wasn't there to maximize my career. I wasn't there to make a lot of money. I was there because someone in that environment needed my connection, my support, my guidance, my light. And that sounds really hokey, and it may even sound a little bit arrogant, but it's not an ego thing. It's just an awareness of we are placed sometimes in situations that may be hard for us, but we're meant to be there because we're raising the vibration or we're helping another person to see their own worth, that we're acting as maybe even a mirror. Sometimes I think when an empath is with a narcissist, it's almost like a test for the narcissist, because the narcissist doesn't have to abuse the empath. They don't have to. They can be kind. They can let that empath love them and support them without harming them. So it's a very interesting dynamic. And if you are an empath and you do keep getting abused, it feels like a punishment. It's not necessarily that. You're being honed. You're being sort of put through the fire so that you will find and understand your strength. I had no idea how strong I was until I left my marriage, until I rebuilt my life. And one of the most powerful and kind and loving and supportive compliments I've ever gotten came from my best friend when she said to me one day, "Michelle, you are the strongest person I know. You are the bravest person I know." And I never felt that way. When you're going through difficult situations, when you're walking through the fire that is leaving a narcissistic relationship, it's hard to see how brave you are. So it's really wonderful when someone else will shine a light on that bravery. And I promise you, you are brave if you are an empath or someone who's been through this, because this does not happen to the weak. It happens typically to the strongest among us. Now, the fifth tip is that hindsight is super valuable. You have to stop to learn your lessons. It's not like I knew all of that I'm sharing with you right away. It took me years of processing this and thinking it through and recognizing what all of these signs meant. It wasn't like an immediate thing. I had to think about it. Many of us are too fast-paced. We're moving too much. We don't stop and take inventory. You need to stop and learn your lessons and really think about, what was that job meant to teach me? What was that person meant to teach me? Why did that cross my path? And when you actually get awareness around that, everything becomes easier, and all of the information oftentimes will flood into your awareness. I know now that my life was built in exactly the way it had to happen. Like, what I have now as a life is so great. It's better than my wildest dreams in a lot of ways. Even though I have the most simple life, it's the exact life that I wanted. But I didn't necessarily think I could ever have such a simple life. So I honestly didn't even envision this for myself. But it all lined up and I ended up where I'm meant to be. So the sixth and final tip is that you really want to use all your tools. There are so many cool tools available to us. So I mentioned the animal cards. I also use this Wild Offering Oracle deck. I've posted a picture of one of the cards in the community tab recently. Love this one. I use this daily. I'm also starting to learn tarot, so I have tarot cards. And I love coming on here on YouTube and listening to tarot readers. I have had some of the most profound readings from people who I have never met. Just clicking on a YouTube video and thinking, okay, this looks good to me, and then realizing I totally vibe with the tarot reader. There's a tarot reader that actually has all the same astrology placements as me. Her name's Lexi the Leo. So shout out to Lexi. She is so spot on with her readings for me, and she's such a gift to me, and it's wonderful. And so, like I mentioned, you can get messages from all different places. Facebook memes, birds outside, animals that cross your path. If you feel so inclined, you can actually learn tools like using a pendulum. Sometimes it's a matter of meditating and letting your own intuition come to mind. Lots of times, a lot of the things that we need to know, we already have inside of us. We just need, like I mentioned earlier, to give ourselves the time and the space. So this was super long, and I was afraid it would get long. If you stuck with me, thank you for sticking with me. I hope you got something from this. Again, like I said, this is meant to give you hope and optimism for your future, and to know that there's always guidance. You're always being supported. You are deeply loved by your spirit team, by the universe. You are lovable. You are love incarnate. It's always coming to you. Just as you give it out, it's coming back to you. One of the hardest things for empaths to do is to receive. So please allow yourself to receive all the goodness. And thanks again for being with me. As always, I wish you happiness and good health. Thanks again.